Stand back and watch. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Mic'd Up, our weekly show where we dissect the biggest issues around the world. I'm your host, Michael Voris. Our very timely topic this week is porn. Timely because the evil one is using the current situation with everybody being essentially locked up in their homes all day. He's using that to his advantage. Porn sites have been handing out free subscriptions and promoting their filth more than ever during this time of isolation. Well, we're going to combat their garbage by exposing what their industry truly is. A cesspool capitalizing and monetizing the vulnerability of young men and women's sexual, emotional, and mental abuse to the highest degree. This is the very industry, in fact, that fuels human sex trafficking and sex slavery. This stuff is in our face every time we get on the internet. Pretty much impossible to avoid because the industry doesn't wait for you to engage them. They engage you, and millions contribute to this, not only by watching, but by turning a blind eye to it all. What you're about to see will be impossible to unsee, so buckle in as we take a deeper look.
The porn industry dominates the internet, and this is borne out by the statistics. Among Americans, 37% think pornography is morally acceptable. In 2019, there were over 42 billion visits to Pornhub, one of the largest porn sites in the world. That's an average of 115 million visits per day, or 80,000 per minute. While most estimates have the average age of first exposure around 11 or 12 years old, 1 in 10 kids under 10 have seen porn. In 2008, around the same time smartphones burst onto the scene, research was published by Cyber Psychology and Behavior, and they found that over 93% of boys and 62% of girls had seen online pornography before age 18. But there is much more to the world of internet porn than just the gigantic number of views greater in number than Amazon, Netflix, and Twitter combined. There is an inseparable connection between sex trafficking and porn. Sex trafficking, this is defined as a form of modern-day slavery in which individuals perform commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, or when the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. A viewer of pornography normally believes the production they are watching is between two consenting adults who are getting paid, therefore everything is fine. Well, there is no way viewers can know if what they are watching is rape or consensual.
The young girl, what is she going to do? She's pressured into doing the scene. Who's she going to call? Her agent? He's going to tell her, no, do the scene because you signed a contract. If you don't do the scene, I'm going to sue you or I'm going to send cease and desist papers to the other agents.
Reading the words of some of these girls who have been sex trafficked and forced into porn, and all of these stories of girls whose lives have been ruined by it and by men who have taken advantage of them.
Forced sex for money is called sex trafficking, and this is illegal. Consensual sex for money is called prostitution, and it is also illegal. Pornography is simply the exchange of sex for money. The only difference is that this, for the most part, doesn't get regulated, and in turn is allowed to be seen by anybody who wants to view it.
A lot of parents are stunned to find out that kids are accessing this stuff because A, they didn't know kids could access this stuff, and B, they had no idea what sort of stuff their kids were accessing. They had no idea that pornography, the mainstream of pornography, has become more violent, more vile, more degrading. They're doing stuff in mainstream porn today that's technically illegal under the Geneva Convention. And so it's taken people a long time to realize that pornography is what it is. Because the courts have sort of judged some sexual content to be covered by the First Amendment, a lot of other courts have simply shied away from touching this issue altogether, and the religious right, social conservatives, the pro-family movement has largely ignored this problem.
So while watching porn, the viewer is either witnessing the crime of sex trafficking, when somebody on screen is being forced or coerced into sexual acts for profit, or the viewer is witnessing prostitution, when the people on screen consent to the sexual acts for profit. It is for this reason that experts understand this inseparable link between pornography, sex trafficking, and prostitution.
I think the connections are obvious to anybody who has eyes to see, right? Pornography is another form of prostitution. And the only way that you can avoid coming to that conclusion is by doing some vernacular gymnastics that will bend you into all sorts of contorted pretzels. In terms of sex trafficking, everybody knows that there is inextricable links between prostitution and sex trafficking. It's why almost all countries have attempted to ban prostitution, even when they have no problem with somebody exchanging money for sex, because they know that an industry, a prostitution industry, inevitably leads to prostitution, and that prostitution and porn are linked. In fact, according to porn stars that I interviewed, most porn stars work as prostitutes on the side. The Netherlands legalized prostitution, set up red light districts, and now they're trying to scale things back because of the amount of sex trafficking that goes on. Increasingly, it's impossible to tell the difference between a sex trafficked girl who's being raped and the pornography that people are logging on to watch just for fun. There's no difference between the two of those things, and people should understand how chilling that is.
According to a report put together by the International Labour Organization, Walk Free Foundation, and the International Organization for Migration, 4.8 million people, almost exclusively female, were victims of forced sexual exploitation in 2016. And it was a report again from the International Labour Organization that said the total annual profits made from forced sexual exploitation are estimated at $99 billion worldwide. Keep in mind, they are estimates from 2012, 8 years ago. The Protection Project Journal of Human Rights and Civil Society did interviews with 854 women in prostitution in 9 countries. Their findings? 49% told us that pornography was made of them while they were in prostitution. But there's more than just legal and cultural issues involved in the porn epidemic. There's also overwhelming research to show the negative effects porn has on the brain. There are dozens of studies that show how porn addiction leads to hypofrontality, which is defined as a condition of reduced activation or inadequate functioning of the cortex of the frontal lobes of the brain. This, in particular, weakens and damages the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is responsible for executive function, things like decision-making, personality expression, evaluating risk, controlling impulses, and more. So yes, porn addiction ruins the most important part of your brain.
Well, there a number of effects that porn has on the brain. One is it can cut down on your short-term memory. The more that you watch porn, the worse your short-term memory tends to get. Another study found that when neurologists hooked up men to brain scans and had them watch pornography, what the doctors found is that the part of the brain that's activated when men use porn is a part of the brain that deals with objects and not people. So that when we say pornography objectifies women, we have neurological evidence to back that statement up.
There are also many extensive studies that show the correlation between porn, aggression, and sexual violence. One in particular analyzed the content of popular pornographic videos and found that, of the 304 scenes analyzed, over 88% contained physical aggression.
There have been over 100 studies that have found a direct link between pornography and aggression, and over 50 studies that have shown a direct link between pornography and sexual violence. And so while it's not the primary cause necessarily, it's a very strong correlate and a contributing factor when we talk about sexual violence occurring. So in fact, when you do the math on it, the odds that there's no link between porn and sexual violence is 1 in 88 decillion, which is a number that's so high we can hardly even count that high.
Ted Bundy, who confessed to murdering 30 women and girls just days before he got Florida's electric chair in 1989, women he often raped before he beat them to death. Bundy also chose to talk about the dangers of porn just days before his execution.
Experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe. I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me, and without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography without question.
Matt travels the world speaking to tens of thousands of people every year. He's a best-selling author many times over. Some of his books are Does God Exist?, Marian Consecration with Aquinas, and what we're going to be tackling today, The Porn Myth, exposing the reality behind the fantasy of pornography. Matt has an online course called Strive. It's a 21-day detox from porn that gives members the layout for how they can defeat porn addiction. He's studied at Holy Apostles College, where he earned both his undergrad and master's degree in philosophy. And on top of all that, he also hosts a podcast called Pints with Aquinas, which gets hundreds of thousands of downloads every month, covering a broad spectrum of topics. Matt FRADD, he's on deck. We'll be right back. Well, you are the author of this book, the Porn Myth, an excellent book that covers all sorts of things. This is the book and the content, obviously, we're going to talk about here. We just had our package on about how just completely out of control porn is in the West and the United States and everything. So one of the first things I'd like to address with you is tell us, you touched on in your book, there are lots of people who think the anti-porn movement is some sort of, Bible-banging religious thing, and, why don't you, like religious crazies and lunatics, go take care of yourselves, your own corner. If you don't like porn, don't watch it, and leave the rest of us to ourselves. Is this just sort of kind of a religious thing? Is it all rooted in just pure religion and people's belief in God?
Yeah, what you just presented is a caricature that the porn industry would like people to believe. But in fact, over the last 40 or so years, there's been a lot of studies that have come out of academia, and it's all very unambiguous about what porn's doing to us as individuals and to our relationships and to society. And that is to say, it's destroying them. It's destroying us. And the porn industry can't hide from it anymore. You could say that science is finally catching up with the truth that the church has always taught in a general way, that porn is absolutely destructive. So I would say the biggest websites right now out there are non-religious websites, yourbrainonporn.com, fightthenewdrug.com, nofap.com. These are run by friends of mine who are not Christians. In fact, my friend Gary Wilson, who runs yourbrainonporn.com, said to me that he's left of Bernie Sanders. I said, bloody hell, can you get further left than that, Thought that was impressive.
What is it? You fall off the beam there, don't you?
Yeah, you come back right again, I think. I'm not sure how that works, but yeah, so that's just to say, no. I mean, it's quite remarkable what science is showing right now.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, specifically what it is science is showing. I mean, there's, we all know that, the brain does things when it sees images or, tastes, smells, whatever, and something comes into the brain through the senses. It creates all kinds of things in the brain, activity, release of hormones, various chemicals and the whole bit. What does porn do in the physical organ inside our skulls, the brain? What's going on?
So I think that there is a myth, right, or that we used to believe, and some people still think it's the case, that in order for something to be addictive, it has to be brought into your body somehow, like nicotine or alcohol, these sorts of things, methamphetamines and so on. But since neuroscientists started looking into the brain, it's actually changed how we understand addiction. And so we now know that behaviors can be just as addictive as substances can. And that's why the DSM-5 classifies gambling as an addiction, though nothing is ingested. Same thing is happening with porn. And so as of today's interview, I checked before I got on, there are currently 46 neuroscience-based studies on porn users, like CAT scans and fMRI scans and these sorts of things. And all of them lend strong support to the addiction model. And so to those who would say, well, porn is just a bad habit, it's not really addictive, I think I understand why people say things like that. They're afraid that by calling it an addiction, that we're somehow saying that the person therefore has no responsibility and doesn't really have to change. And that's not what we're saying at all. So porn does affect the brain in a negative way, and we can definitely get into that if you want. It affects the dopamine system. Mm-hmm. Dopamine is that neurotransmitter which gives us that I gotta have it now feeling. As people start consuming more and more pornography, the pornography that they're consuming becomes increasingly boring, and they end up having to seek out more and more novel forms of pornography, more deviant forms of pornography, just so that their brain can feel dopamine's effects the way it once did.
So let me interrupt you if I can, just so people understand. So that's a physical, chemical release neurotransmitter thing going on in the brain that needs more, like if I was taking coke, using cocaine or something, I would need more or a higher strength dosage or something like that. That the same type of thing is going on physically inside the organ.
It's analogous for sure, yeah.
Okay. Is there?
Yeah. Here's one study just to show that. Back in 2014, a study came out of the Max Planck Institute in Germany, which is like the Harvard of Germany, and they did fMRI scans on men who were looking at porn, and they found that depending on how long they had been viewing it and how much they viewed it, that is certain. These men, there was a correlation between porn use and shrinkage in the brain. Like an actual physical effect. Maybe you've heard those studies that talk about New York cab drivers or London cab drivers who had larger parts of their brain because of what they had to memorize, or violinists because of the way they had to use their left hand would have larger parts of their brain. We're seeing the brain actually atrophy as people consume more and more pornography. And again, if people want to learn more about that, type in "the brain on porn." The lead researcher's name is Simon Kuhn, Kuhn.
That's remarkable. It's remarkable that actually, damages you in 100 different ways, but probably the way most people know, actually, your brain shrinks. You may remember back in the day, I can't remember exactly when this was, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, here in the States, there was a PSA, a public service announcement campaign about using drugs. And it was, this is your brain, and then this is your brain on drugs, which is, I'm sure, where your friend got his name of his website from, your brain on porn. So the same type of thing. You're sort of frying your brain the more porn you give it, and the more porn you give it, the more it wants, and you get caught in this horrible catch-22.
Absolutely. And I think for most of us, quite frankly, who are watching, we've, maybe not most, but many of us, we've experienced that firsthand. We don't need a sort of peer-reviewed journal or article in a journal to tell us that. I mean, I experienced that firsthand in my own life. This passionate desire to stop, especially after a sexual fall, this tremendous feeling of shame and this white knuckle resolution that this is going to be the last time. I don't want to be this sort of person. And then you end up finding, a day or two later, you're right back where you started, and it can be very dispiriting.
And is that because, I think lots of people may, and speaking to that, sort of the psychological, spiritual thing going on at the same time the physical thing is going on in the brain organ, is that like you need a fix, like a drug addict needs a fix, like the brain is like, I need another blast of dopamine, I need that. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, here's a good analogy. Suppose you're on the phone with somebody, maybe your boss, and your boss is quite upset, and maybe they raise their voice as they talk to you. If that happens, you might move the phone away from your ear, and you'll be able to hear them just fine. If they were to begin speaking normally again, you wouldn't be able to hear them unless you brought the phone back up to your ear. And that's a good analogy for porn addiction, because when one sits down in one's room or opens up their phone or laptop and begins looking at pornography, it's as if their brain is being shouted at by dopamine. And so now when they close that laptop lid and go out into regular life and seek to engage in the activities that they used to be involved in, going to church, shooting or reading a book or hanging out with friends, it feels like this. It's like the brain can't hear dopamine's effects as it once did, and so the activities it used to find meaningful, enjoyable, it no longer does, and so that person feels this need to retreat back into wherever they were looking at porn just to get that fix again so that they can feel more alive. But what we're seeing, there's these people who run websites like addictedtointernetpornography.com, nofap.com, rebootnation.com. There are tens of thousands of men who are talking about experiencing things like erectile dysfunction and other sexual dysfunctions because of their porn use. And when they put away the porn and they gain some sobriety, not only did their sexual function come back, but they'd use language like, the world seems so much more brighter, so much more colorful. I'm feeling emotions for the first time in my life, because maybe ever since they were a kid, whenever they felt a sort of disturbing thought, they turned to pornography to sort of pacify that emotional turbulence.
So let me ask you here, I understand that obviously many women have this same type of problem, addiction to porn, regular frequenters of porn sites and things, but speaking specifically to the male population, we hear that particularly males, boys, that their brain doesn't really kick into gear and it's fully developed, ready to go, take on the world, understand things the way they are, until roughly 25 years old when the male brain is finally formed. What damage is done to males in particular, if this starts when they're in like maybe middle school, 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, and then they are dipping in and out of it more frequently, by the time they're 25, is there any dialing back from that? Or has this just become such a part of their brain now, the organ in their head, that there's really no getting away from it?
Right, yes. And neuroscientists say that it's around 25 that the frontal lobes of the brain are fully developed. And this is sort of like the managerial center of the brain that enables us to weigh the consequences before acting. And this is why teenagers often don't act. And you think, what were you thinking? Well, that part of the head you're pointing to is the part they haven't fully developed, which explains why they weren't thinking. There are many negative consequences that result from a young person viewing pornography. One of them is what psychologists talk about more and more these days. People have what they would call a sexual template, right? So as people view pornography at a young age and then feel the need to view more deviant forms of pornography, they're shaping their sexual template and are discovering that they're attracted to things that maybe a year or 2 years ago they would have said grossed them out. And this can have to do with people of the same sex. It can have to do with, even things like animals or certain abusive forms of pornography. And that's obviously terrifying, to grow up and to be warping your sexual template in that way. The reason we know that that's very much, moldable, is that people who have had that happen to them and have broken free of pornography have begun to find their sexual template settle back to normal. As far as the long-lasting effects of what porn does to the brain, I wouldn't know enough off the top of my head to speak about them with any sort of authority, but my understanding is that the brain, to a great degree, can heal itself over time. So scientists used to think that the brain's set like cement after adolescence. We now know that's not true. The brain is plastic. Not that it's made of polyethylene, but that it's constantly rewiring and making new connections. Norman Doidge, in his best-selling book, The Brain That Changes Itself, has a really great analogy. He says, suppose you're standing in a forest and there are two paths in front of you. One path leads to using pornography. The other path leads to abstaining from pornography. Maybe ever since you were a kid, you've been walking down this one path. So now, as you stand there, this path is very well worn. We create these neural pathways in our brain as we engage in activities that give us a neurological, pleasant response. So, if you're someone who's been doing this ever since you were a kid and now you want to decide to stop, it's very, very difficult because this path is totally overgrown, but it's not impossible. And as we begin to forge pathways in this particular area, we're going to find it's going to be easier to abstain from pornography, and the desire to go towards it, is going to, the path will overgrow, and it'll actually be increasingly difficult to just fall into it as we maybe thought we once did.
So let me ask you, for the, not often would I say, let me play devil's advocate for the porn industry here.
Yeah, please.
Who cares? So what? So a bunch of people are all addicted to porn, and that's it, and their brain goes weird and whatever, and they just see it all the time, and they just want more and weirder videos and whatever. So what? It's a free country. If you don't like it, don't do it, but don't stop me from doing it. What's wrong with just saying just let the person go?
Well, I suppose in one sense it's true. I mean, people can just choose to destroy themselves if they want, but I don't think that's a loving response, and I think we shouldn't be involved in the propagating of media that hurts other people. And we're only speaking about one side of how pornography hurts other people. We're not talking about the fact that, there's been multiple instances of sexual trafficking on some of the world's largest porn sites and things like this. I mean, there's a lot of sort of abuse that goes on. If people found out tomorrow that Nike, let's say, or Reebok, I'm not picking on any particular sneaker company, but if one of them was mass producing their sneakers and 10% or 5% of it was done in a sweatshop somewhere, people would rightly boycott that sneaker company. And so I think we should, just looking at it from a strictly secular angle, not even bringing religion into it, we should seriously consider boycotting pornography because it harms other people in multiple ways. It's not conducive to good relationships and to society as a whole. And for that reason, I think that's a good argument. But of course, people can do what they want to do. Whenever I speak on
the body, from a theological perspective, spiritual perspective, the body, matter, is so imbued and relational to the immaterial, to the soul, to the spirit, that what happens to the body has a translation into the spiritual. Let's talk about that for a moment here. What is the, you can't hook up electrodes to your soul and see what's happening to your soul, like you can measure the brain. But what's happening to the soul of a person who, sort of firmly plants their foot on that path, to use your analogy, and starts going down it? What's happening spiritually to the person?
There's so much that could be said. I'm just thinking of this analogy here. I haven't tried it out before, so let's give it a bash and see if it works. It may fall flat. Just like, I think people can all understand that a person can become so imbued in pornography that they cease to be able to see the beauty, let's say, in their wife. Their wife might be very beautiful, but this person has become so calloused by pornography that they can't sort of perceive her personhood and her particular beauty anymore. And I think likewise, sin disfigures the soul, and can to such a degree that we look around us at creation and we can no longer perceive from it a creator and the spiritual meaning there. It almost like it blinds us to the spiritual realities. And so certainly pornography is this grave sin. And when you think about it, it's this lie. It's a lie about what the human person is and is for. And it's a lie about the person to their detriment. I mean, a man deeply wants to be a protector, a giver of strength. A woman, among other things, desires to be treasured, protected, and this sort of thing. But pornography makes the one who ought to be a protector a predator, and the one who desires to be treasured a target. And so both of us miss what we were made for, in a sense. And then spiritually, it can kill our souls and send us to hell for all eternity. I think very often Christians have this inadequate way they explain and think about Christianity. It would be like explaining the Lord of the Rings this way. You say, well, there was this ring and it was terrible. It wasn't conducive to the flourishing of Hobbiton. And so Sam and Frodo got rid of it and everyone was happy. And you're like, yeah, you left out a lot. And I think very often we do that with Christianity. God exists and he loves you and he sent his son to die for you, to rescue you so you could be with him. You're like, that's true. But, Satan exists. He hates you intensely. You are not living on a neutral plane. Right. There are forces that we can't perceive all the time very well that are drawing us towards this dark side. This isn't Star Wars. This isn't fiction. This isn't Disney. This is the reality in which we find ourselves, a world at war. And so for that reason, we're going to need the intercession of the saints, the protection of our guardian angels, the sacraments and prayer, and this sort of thing to aid us in this spiritual combat.
Do you think there is a, how would you call it, like a 12-step program, for lack of a better term? Doesn't have to be 12. How does somebody who has ventured into this, maybe they did it in innocence around quotes, they didn't realize it, they got too close to the fire, now they're in it. How do they get out of it? I mean, first, I suppose they have to realize they're in it. So seems to me that's like sort of the first big, huge step. But even then, you'll hear you in reference, with your own self, it's like, oh my gosh, you're in it. How do you get out of this? How do you tear away from it? You're not a neutral actor here. There's forces, evil, diabolical, chaining you back down to this. So how do you break out of that?
The first thing we have to do is admit that we have a problem and need to change. We can no longer sort of blame our relationship with our parents or Hollywood or the porn industry or the internet. We have to sort of man up, as it were, look ourselves squarely in the mirror and say, I'd like to be a better person. I want a more beautiful life.
Let me interrupt you there for a second, Matt. What are the signs that if somebody's looking at their life and they're not having some problem, their life isn't falling apart, they're not up till 100 hours of no sleep watching porn and all this, they haven't been fired from their job because they're fast asleep on it. Skip all of that. If they're just the porn guy and that's it, how do they know? What are the signs, or at least early signs, they should say, uh-oh, I'm kind of venturing into a problem area here? What are the things that would typically begin to go wrong that would be little red flags for you?
Yeah, so I think there's like two different discussions I'd want to have. Suppose I have two men in front of me. One says porn's not a big deal. The other's like, it's killing me and I hate it and I want to be free. The conversations I'm going to have with each man are going to be very different. So to this first man, I'm going to say, you're living a pathetic life. You're acting like a child, pleasuring yourself to pixels on a screen. You can continue this if you want, and you'll see how sepia tone your life will become and how wide the gates of hell are. Wake up. So I'd want to talk to him in a very sort of manful sort of way. You really want to sort of, I was just reading philosopher Roger Scruton today, who said something to the effect of, sometimes shame and guilt, we speak about how bad shame and guilt are. Well, if you're engaged in a shameful activity, you ought to feel shame.
Yeah, you should feel shame.
Yeah, and what's required is not that you would go to therapy to alleviate it, but to begin acting rightly so that shame and guilt ought not to occur. Now, of course, in a Christian context, we want to turn to our loving Father who sent his Son to die for us, who loves us, who sees us as his children, and we want to kind of step into that identity. But some of the warning signs, well, I think a lot of men have to sort of hit a sort of rock bottom in order to wake them up to realize that this isn't okay. Maybe they're in a marriage and their wife discovers, and they discover for the first time in a while, gee, my marriage isn't unbreakable. This I shouldn't take this for granted. Or maybe they get fired from work, or maybe they start venturing into pornographic websites they said they never would, and they're very disgusted, and that sort of wakes them up. And so usually it's at that point that you can then speak into this person's life. So they admit there's a problem, then they need to be accountable. They need to find another person in their life who can journey with them. And well, the first thing, let me say before I forget, is I created a 21-day detox from porn course called strive21.com. strive21.com. We've put about $150,000 into this production and distribution of this thing. It's incredibly well produced. Basically, for 21 days, you get like a 5-minute video from me guiding you along these 21 days. There's a challenge you have to perform that day, and then you're invited to talk with the other brothers in the community forum. It's 100% free. You can be as anonymous as you want. We have over 13,000 men going through the course as we speak. And so if there's a man out there, if you struggle with lust in any way, I'd say go to strive21.com, because I say a lot more there that I'm not going to be able to say here. Sure. But you're right. I think they should have Covenant Eyes, which is the best filtering and accountability software on the web. Mm-hmm. If they use my name, Matt FRADD, one word, they can get a month for free to try it out. I have it on all my devices. I don't let my children play at houses where they don't have Covenant Eyes. That's how serious I am about it. I have an app people can download for free. It's called Victory. There's a counter, tells you how many days and hours you've been free of porn. You can put an accountability partner in there. If you're feeling tempted, you click a button, they get a notification saying, please pray for this person. So there's a lot of great resources out there. And then I certainly would tell the person not to be against the possibility of going to a 12-step group like SA. Certainly, the quality of different groups are going to differ. And I know that some people have had very negative experiences with them. But I mean, some people have had very negative experiences of lots of things. It doesn't mean those things are bad.
Right.
So I would say finding a good therapist, finding a good SA group at sa.org, finding a good spiritual director. I mean, there's much we could say. And again, if people want to get into that, I'd say go to strive21.com, and I speak a lot more about it there.
Let me ask two really quick questions. One, just yes or no. If you're a married man, if you are viewing porn, you're committing adultery, yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but there's a difference, obviously.
First of all, I think the wife should answer that question, but go ahead.
Well, when our blessed Lord says, if you look at a woman lustfully, you commit adultery in your heart.
Yeah.
Adultery in your heart is obviously different to adultery in body and heart.
Right.
I mean, suppose you're a wife who finds out your husband is viewing pornography. You ought to be devastated. You ought to be angry. All of those things. But suppose you find he's been, having rendezvous with some woman that he meets. All of a sudden, it's a lot more calculated.
Sure.
He may have a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, there's a lot more. So I wouldn't want to necessarily conflate the two together.
Right.
But certainly, looking at pornography is an act of infidelity, 100%.
And the second thing, something that's really burgeoning now, you start to see ads for it all over the place, is the whole, I'm not even sure what it's called, like the sex robot industry. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of like the next, step after porn?
I think the next thing is going to be, virtual reality. Yeah. They're working really hard to get these things off the ground. And I think virtual reality pornography is going to make today's pornography look the way today's pornography makes Playboy look. It's going to be absolutely devastating. It's going to emasculate another generation of men, which is why we need to begin speaking about this, and I thank you for the opportunity. And I would say, if you're a parent out there, look, if your son or daughter looks at pornography, it's your fault. So don't get angry at them. Apologize to them that you didn't do a good enough job, and then bloody well start doing a better job.
Excellent. Excellent.
I know that sounds like strong language, but
no, it's
I
needed.
can't tell you how many teenagers that I meet whose lives are destroyed because their parent handed them a portable X-rated movie theater that apparently makes phone calls. It's not okay.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Matt, FRADD, tell people where they can get the porn myth. Where can they get this?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, let me tell you that 100% of my royalties from that book go to help a group in San Diego that helps sexually trafficked victims. So I don't make a cent from the book. That's not why I'm pushing it. But you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Audible if you'd like to listen to it. And as I say, that all goes to that group in San Diego. And then strive21.com would be the 21-day detox from porn course that men can check out.
Excellent, Meg. Awesome conversation. Awesome. God bless you in your work. Free as many people from the grip of you-know-who that you can.
Glory to God. Thank you for the opportunity.
All righty. God bless, Matt. Thank you, sir. And there you have it. Fight this stuff with all you've got. It's our only option if we want to call ourselves true Christians. With the fight in the spiritual realm, knowledge is essential. Our intellects, in fact, are part of our spiritual powers, along with our will. We must know the truth to the extent that we are able. We must also know our enemy, and he is prowling about, looking to devour whoever he can, as St. Peter warns us. This is quite literally manifested in the porn industry. St. Pope Pius X tells us that the greatest obstacle in the apostolate of the Church is the timidity, or rather the cowardice, of the faithful. Pray the rosary, live in a state of grace, evangelize, and fight. That's it for this week's Mic'd Up.